I never used to be afraid of staying home alone. My parents were often out late, working long hours, and I was used to keeping an eye on my younger brother. We'd play video games, order pizza, and watch movies until we fell asleep. It was all so routine, so normal, until the night it wasn't. The night that changed everything. It was a Friday evening, just after sunset, and my parents had left for a rare date night. They wouldn't be back until midnight, so it was up to me to keep my 8-year-old brother, Jamie, entertained. We had our usual routine down: order pizza, play some video games, and then watch whatever new cartoon movie Jamie was obsessed with that week. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heating system kicking in and the occasional rustle of wind against the windows. We lived in a suburban neighborhood, the kind with cookie-cutter houses and neatly trimmed lawns where nothing exciting ever happened. The streetlights cast a soft glow over the road outside, and the distant sound of cars passing by on the highway was a constant backdrop. I ordered the pizza around 7 from the same place we always ordered from. They knew us by name at this point, and I knew the delivery would take about 30 minutes. We killed time by playing Mario Kart, Jamie's favorite game. His laughter filled the living room as he beat me in race after race, his little fingers mashing the buttons with a kind of reckless joy only a kid could manage. "Pizza's here," I announced when the doorbell rang, pausing the game and heading to the front door. The delivery guy was the usual one, a teenager not much older than me, maybe 18 or 19, with a bored expression and earbuds hanging from his neck. He handed me the pizza, I handed him the cash, and that was that. I set the pizza on the coffee table and Jamie was already grabbing a slice before I could even sit down. We ate in comfortable silence, the movie playing in the background, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a subtle, nagging sense that something was off. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just nerves from being in charge for the night. But the feeling didn't go away. After dinner, we cleaned up and settled back on the couch, Jamie dozing off next to me as the movie played on. I was half watching, half scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A soft tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on glass. I paused, turning the volume down on the TV. The sound came again, this time a little louder, a little more insistent. I felt my heart skip a beat as I glanced toward the window, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just the darkened yard, the shadowy outline of the trees swaying in the wind. Probably just a branch, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease. But then I heard it again, this time coming from the back of the house. "Jamie, did you hear that?" I asked, nudging him awake. He rubbed his eyes and looked up at me. "Groggy." "Hear what?" "Someone's knocking on the window or something. Stay here, okay? I'm gonna go check it out." He nodded, already half asleep again, and I reluctantly got up from the couch. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the living room, casting long shadows on the walls. The tapping continued, steady and rhythmic, guiding me like a beacon toward the back door. I walked slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the kitchen, where the back door was, I hesitated. I couldn't explain why, but I suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something bad was about to happen. Taking a deep breath, I flicked on the kitchen light, the sudden brightness making me squint. The tapping stopped immediately, plunging the house into an eerie silence. I stood there for a moment, listening, but there was nothing, no sound, no movement, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I shook my head, feeling foolish. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, forcing a laugh. "You're just spooking yourself out." But just as I turned to go back to the living room, I heard it again, a sharp, insistent knock on the back door, loud enough to make me jump. I spun around, my heart racing, and there, standing just outside the glass door, was a man. He was tall, with a hood pulled low over his face, obscuring his features. He was just standing there, staring at me through the glass, not moving, not saying a word. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, we just stared at each other, a silent standoff in the middle of my kitchen. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was this guy? What did he want? Why wasn't he saying anything? Then, slowly, he reached out and tried the doorknob. It rattled as he twisted it, but the door was locked, thank God. He tried again, more forcefully this time, but it wouldn't budge. That's when the fear really kicked in. This wasn't some random person who'd gotten lost and needed directions. This guy was trying to get into my house. "Jamie," I called out, my voice shaking. "Get upstairs. Now." Jamie appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What's going on?" "Just go upstairs and lock yourself in the bathroom. Don't come out until I say so." He didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He just ran, his footsteps echoing up the stairs as he bolted toward safety. I heard the bathroom door slam shut, the lock clicking into place, and I felt a small wave of relief. At least he was safe. But I wasn't. The man was still there, still trying the doorknob, his movements slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. My mind raced with options, but there was only one that made sense. I had to call the police. I backed away from the door, reaching for my phone, never taking my eyes off the man. But just as I was about to dial 911, he stopped. He stopped trying the door, stopped moving altogether. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly as if he was listening for something. And then, in one fluid motion, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the backyard. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, expecting him to come back, to try another way in. But he didn't. The backyard was still, silent, as if he'd never been there at all. I ran to the front of the house to make sure everything was secure. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the locks to turn, but finally everything was locked, every door, every window. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, my voice barely steady as I told the dispatcher what had happened. She assured me that officers were on their way, but it felt like an eternity before I saw the red and blue lights flashing outside the house. When the police arrived, I felt a rush of relief so intense I nearly cried. 2 officers came inside, one staying with me in the living room while the other checked the perimeter of the house. Jamie came downstairs, his face pale, but I could see the fear starting to fade now that help had arrived. "Did you see where he went?" the officer asked, her voice calm and professional. I shook my head. "No, he just disappeared. One minute he was there, the next he was gone." She nodded, jotting something down in her notebook. "We'll check the area, but it sounds like he's long gone. You did the right thing calling us." As the officers searched the property, I tried to calm Jamie down, assuring him that everything was okay, that we were safe now. But deep down, I didn't feel safe at all. The house felt different, the shadows darker, the silence heavier. Every creak, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump, my nerves shot from the adrenaline. After what felt like hours, the officers returned, their expressions grim. "We didn't find anyone," one of them said, "but we did find something strange." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "There were footprints in the backyard leading from the woods to the back door. But here's the thing, there's no sign of him leaving. The footprints just stop, right outside the door." My blood ran cold. "What? That doesn't make any sense." "He walked away. I saw him." The officer nodded. "We know, but there's no trace of him. It's like he just vanished." The rest of the night was a blur. Answering the officer's questions, trying to comfort Jamie, finally getting him to sleep after what felt like hours of reassurance. But I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the night in my mind, over and over, trying to make sense of it. Who was that man? What did he want? And how did he disappear without a trace? The police said they'd keep an eye on the neighborhood, that they'd increase patrols in the area, but it didn't do much to ease my fear. Every night after that, I double-checked every lock, every window, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Because whoever or whatever he wasn't just a man trying to break into a house. He was something else, something that defied explanation. And I knew, deep down, that he'd be back. We moved out of that house a few months later. My parents said it was because of a new job opportunity, but I knew the real reason. They didn't want to admit it, but they were just as scared as I was. Sometimes late at night, I still think about him, still wonder if he's out there, somewhere, watching. And every time I hear a knock on the door, every time I see a shadow move in the corner of my eye, I remember that night. The night that changed everything. Because some fears never really go away. They just linger like a dark cloud on the horizon, always there, even when you think you're safe. Working as a pizza delivery driver isn't exactly the most glamorous job, but it's easy enough, and most nights pass without much incident. You drive around, drop off pizzas, collect tips, and go home. But every now and then, something happens that makes you question if it's worth the risk. This is the story of one of those nights, a night that started like any other, but ended in a way that still haunts me to this day. It was a cold, windy night in late November. The kind of night where the wind cuts right through you, no matter how many layers you're wearing. The air had a biting chill, and the sky was a deep, impenetrable black, with thick clouds obscuring the moon. I was working the late shift, which meant fewer deliveries, but more tips. People tend to be more generous when they realize you're out there braving the elements while they're cozy inside. I was just about to wrap up for the night when the order came in. It was from a part of town I didn't deliver to often, an older neighborhood on the outskirts with large, sprawling houses set far back from the road. The kind of place where the streets are dark and deserted after 9 p.m., where you rarely see anyone walking around. The address was on the last street before the woods began, a dead-end road with only a few houses, all of them spaced far apart. It didn't look like there were many lights on, but I didn't think much of it. It was late, after all, and people were probably winding down for the night. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed that it was completely dark, save for a single dim light on the front porch. The house itself was large and old, with a wraparound porch and peeling paint that suggested it hadn't been maintained in years. There were no cars in the driveway, and no signs of life inside. I parked in front and grabbed the pizza from the passenger seat, double-checking the address. It matched, but something about the situation felt off. I hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car, the cold air hitting me like a wall as I stepped onto the gravel driveway. As I approached the front door, I noticed a small, hand-painted sign hanging from the porch railing. It read, "Use the back door." I frowned. It wasn't unheard of for people to have specific delivery instructions, but I'd never been asked to use the back door before, especially not this late at night. I walked around the side of the house, my footsteps crunching on the gravel, my breath visible in the cold air. The backyard was even darker than the front, with no lights at all to guide my way. The wind rustled through the trees, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the highway, but otherwise, it was eerily quiet. When I reached the back door, I found it ajar, just slightly. I hesitated again, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe they left it open for me, knowing I was coming. Maybe they didn't want to be disturbed by the doorbell. I knocked on the door, gently at first, then a bit louder when there was no response. "Hello? Pizza delivery?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No answer, just the wind and the creaking of the old house. I was about to turn around and leave when I heard a sound, a faint rustling, like someone moving inside. Relief washed over me. Maybe they hadn't heard me the first time. I knocked again, this time a bit more confidently. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The rustling stopped, and there was a long pause before I heard footsteps approaching. They were slow and deliberate, the kind of footsteps that seemed too heavy for an ordinary person. My heart began to race, my mind conjuring up all sorts of unsettling scenarios. Finally, the door creaked open just a crack, and a man's face appeared in the narrow gap. Or rather, I should say, what I could see of his face. He was wearing a black ski mask, the kind that covers everything but the eyes and mouth. His eyes were dark, almost shadowed, and I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or through me. Hi," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've got your pizza here." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me through the crack in the door. Then, slowly, he opened the door a bit wider, just enough for me to see that he was dressed all in black. Black jacket, black pants, black boots. Everything about him screamed danger. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Are you the one who ordered the pizza?" He didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there, watching me. The silence was unbearable, the air thick with tension. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there, to drop the pizza and run, but I couldn't move. It was like my feet were glued to the ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded, just once, a slow, deliberate nod. But there was something off about the way he did it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Right, I said, forcing a nervous laugh. That'll be $15.87. He didn't move, didn't reach for his wallet, didn't say a word, just kept staring at me, his eyes dark and unreadable behind the mask. Cash or card? I asked, my voice trembling now. He reached into his pocket, and for a split second, I thought he was going to pull out a gun or a knife. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with thoughts of how I could escape, what I could do if he attacked. But instead, he pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and handed it to me without a word. I took it, my hands shaking, and quickly made change from the small pouch I kept in my jacket. "Here's your change," I said, holding out the bills and coins. He didn't take them, just stood there staring at me. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The fear was almost suffocating. "Keep it," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. Then, without another word, he reached out and took the pizza box from me, his gloved hands brushing against mine as he did. The touch sent a jolt of fear through me, and I pulled back quickly, almost dropping the change in my haste. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door wide open behind him. I stood there for a moment, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The house was silent again, the open door revealing nothing but darkness inside. I had a sudden, overwhelming urge to follow him, to see what was inside, to make sure everything was okay, but the fear was too strong, too insistent. I turned and walked back to my car as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. My hands were still shaking as I fumbled with the keys, finally getting the car started. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the house. The door was still open, the dim light from the porch casting long shadows across the yard. And then, just as I was about to turn onto the road, I saw him again, standing in the doorway, watching me leave. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly looked away, focusing on the road ahead. But the image of him standing there, that dark, menacing silhouette, was burned into my mind. I drove away as fast as I could, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The entire drive back to the pizzeria, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that at any moment he would appear in my rearview mirror. When I finally arrived back at the pizzeria, I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. But the fear wouldn't go away, wouldn't let me relax. I kept thinking about that dark, empty house, that man in the ski mask, and the way he'd watched me leave like he knew something I didn't. It was late by the time I finished my shift, and I was the last one to leave the pizzeria. The streets were empty, the town silent, as I locked up and walked to my car. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, and the temperature had dropped even further. As I got into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again. I scanned the parking lot, the shadows between the buildings, but there was no one there. Just my imagination, I told myself, just nerves after a long night. But as I drove home, the feeling only intensified. The streets were deserted, the houses dark, and every time I stopped at a red light, I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that masked man standing there. I pulled into my driveway, relieved to finally be home. But as I got out of the car and walked to the front door, I froze. There, on my porch, was a pizza box. I hadn't ordered a pizza. I hadn't brought any home. The box was identical to the ones we used at the pizzeria, but there was no label, no receipt, nothing to indicate where it had come from. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly approached the porch, my breath fogging in the cold night air. I reached out with a trembling hand and lifted the lid. The box was empty, but inside, scrawled in black marker on the underside of the lid, were 3 words: "I see you." I stumbled back, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled to pull it out, my hands shaking as I checked the message. It was from my coworker at the pizzeria. "Hey, did you leave a pizza box on the porch when you left? If not, we might have a problem." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone about the delivery, about the man in the ski mask, but somehow he'd found out where I lived and he was sending me a message. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those dark, shadowed eyes staring at me from behind the ski mask. I heard his voice, low and gravelly, telling me to keep the change. I never went back to that house, Never found out who that man was or what he wanted. But I know this, he's still out there, watching, waiting. And every time I see a pizza box, every time I deliver to a dark, empty house, I feel that same cold, creeping fear. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to anyone, even you. I've always been the kind of person who tries to see the best in people. Give them the benefit of the doubt, believe that most folks are just doing their best to get by. That's probably why, when the delivery man asked if he could use my restroom, I didn't think twice about saying yes. But what started as a simple act of kindness quickly spiraled into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. It was a Friday night, and I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted and too tired to cook. So I did what I always do when I'm feeling lazy. I ordered pizza. I was looking forward to a quiet evening of binge-watching Netflix, maybe cracking open a beer or two. Nothing special, just a relaxing night in. My apartment was in one of those older buildings downtown, the kind with creaky wooden floors and drafty windows. It wasn't the nicest place, but it had character, and it was close to work, so I couldn't complain. The only downside was the isolation. Being on the top floor meant I didn't have a lot of neighbors, and the ones I did have kept to themselves. On a night like this, though, that kind of isolation seemed more like a blessing. The delivery guy showed up right on time, which was a relief because I was starving. He looked like your typical delivery driver, mid-20s, disheveled hair, wearing a baseball cap and the pizza place's branded polo shirt. There was nothing unusual about him, at least not at first. I handed him the cash, he handed me the pizza, and that should have been the end of it. But as I was about to close the door, he hesitated. "Hey, do you mind if I use your restroom real quick?" he asked, shifting awkwardly on his feet. "I've been driving around all night and I really gotta go." I blinked, caught off guard by the request. It wasn't something I'd ever been asked before by a delivery driver. My first instinct was to say no. It felt like crossing a line, letting a stranger into my home like that. But then I saw the look on his face, and I felt a pang of sympathy. The guy was just trying to do his job. If he really had been driving around all night, well, I could understand the need for a quick pit stop. "Sure, it's just down the hall," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "First door on the left." "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it," he said, giving me a quick nod before disappearing down the hallway. As the door clicked shut behind him, I suddenly felt a wave of unease wash over me. It wasn't anything specific, just a gut feeling that something was off. But I brushed it aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. I placed the pizza box on the kitchen counter and grabbed a plate, trying to focus on the fact that I was about to dig into a hot, cheesy pizza. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The minutes ticked by, and I realized the guy had been in the bathroom for longer than seemed normal. I glanced down the hallway, the door still closed, and that uneasy feeling started to grow. I distracted myself by turning on the TV, flipping through channels aimlessly, but I couldn't shake the nagging worry. Maybe he was just taking a while, maybe he had a stomach problem or something. But as more time passed, I started to feel anxious. "Hey, you okay in there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice light. There was no answer, just the faint sound of water running. My heart began to race as I imagined all sorts of scenarios. Maybe he was sick, or maybe he was snooping around, or maybe he was just taking a long time. I tried to stay calm, but my imagination was running wild. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps sounding loud in the quiet apartment. I knocked on the bathroom door, trying to keep the rising panic out of my voice. "Hey man, you okay? You've been in there a while." There was a long pause, and then the water stopped. My heart was pounding in my chest as I waited for a response, but instead of an answer, the door slowly creaked open. The delivery guy stood there, staring at me with a blank expression. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were glassy, like he wasn't really seeing me. I took a step back, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. You good?" I asked, trying to mask my growing fear with a nervous laugh. He didn't answer, didn't even blink. He just stood there, staring at me, his hands hanging limply at his sides. I noticed then that his knuckles were white, clenched tightly as if he was holding something back. "Look, if you're not feeling well, maybe you should." Before I could finish, he took a step forward, his body language shifting from passive to something more menacing. My instincts screamed at me to get away, to put as much distance between us as possible. "Listen, I think it's time for you to go," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice wavered. His eyes finally focused on me, narrowing slightly as he tilted his head to the side. "I'm not going anywhere." The way he said it, the coldness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. This was no longer a simple bathroom break. I realized then that I had made a mistake. Letting this stranger into my home was a mistake. I backed up, my mind racing with what to do next. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thickening with tension. He took another step forward, and I saw his hand twitch toward his pocket. That was all I needed to see. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding as I tried to stay one step ahead of him. I could hear his footsteps behind me, slow but deliberate, as if he knew I had nowhere to go. "Get out of my house!" I yelled, fumbling with the lock, my hands shaking uncontrollably. He didn't stop, didn't even flinch. The door finally gave way, and I stumbled outside, slamming it shut behind me. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers as I backed away from the door. The operator picked up almost immediately, and I quickly explained the situation, my voice shaky and breathless. "There's a man in my house. He's a delivery guy, but he won't leave. Please, I need help." "Stay on the line," the operator instructed, her voice calm but firm. "Police are on their way. Are you in a safe location?" "I'm outside, but he's still in there," I replied, glancing back at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. "Stay outside and don't go back in until the police arrive," she said, her tone reassuring. "Help is on the way." The minutes felt like hours as I stood there waiting, my eyes glued to the front door. It remained closed, but I could hear faint sounds from inside, footsteps, the creak of the floorboards. My mind raced with possibilities. What was he doing in there? Was he searching for something? Was he going to come back out? Finally, I saw the flashing lights of the police cars pulling up in front of my building, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. 2 officers approached, one of them staying with me while the other went inside. I watched as the officer cautiously entered my apartment, her hand on her holster. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for her to come back out, hoping that this nightmare would finally be over. When the officer returned, her expression was unreadable. "He's gone," she said simply. "Gone?" I echoed, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. "What do you mean, gone? He was just in there." The officer shook her head. "We searched the entire apartment. There's no sign of him." I stared at her in disbelief. But I saw him. He was right there." The officer looked at me sympathetically. "We believe you, but he's not here now. Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" I shook my head, the fear slowly giving way to confusion. "No, he just disappeared." The officers took my statement and searched the surrounding area, but they found nothing. No sign of the delivery man, no indication of where he might have gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's place, too shaken to stay in my apartment alone. The next day, I called the pizza place to report the incident, hoping to get some answers. But when I described the delivery man, the manager seemed just as confused as I was. "There's no one matching that description working here," he said, his voice laced with concern. "Are you sure you got the pizza from us?" "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, my mind reeling. "He was wearing your uniform. He had the pizza. How could he not work for you?" "I don't know what to tell you," the manager said, "but I'll look into it." I never heard back from the pizza place, and I never saw the delivery man again. But the experience left a scar, a lingering sense of fear that followed me long after that night. I moved out of that apartment a few months later, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched, that at any moment, that man might come back. Even now, years later, I still think about him, about those glassy eyes, that blank expression, the way he said he wasn't going anywhere. And every time I order delivery, every time I see someone in a uniform, I feel that same cold, creeping fear, because some doors, once open, can never truly be closed. And some people, once they enter your life, never really leave, even when they're gone. I've been working as a pizza delivery driver for a couple of years now. It pays the bills, and I enjoy the solitude of driving around at night, listening to music, and making my rounds. Most nights are pretty uneventful, with the occasional weird encounter, but nothing that ever really fazed me until that one night. That night still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that what happened wasn't just a product of my imagination. It was a cold, misty evening in late November, the kind of night where the fog hangs low and thick, muffling sounds and distorting shapes. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of the city dampened by the fog. I had just finished a delivery in a quiet residential neighborhood and was on my way back to the pizzeria when I got a call from my manager. "Hey, we just got a last-minute order," he said. "Can you take one more delivery before you clock out?" I sighed, already tired from a long shift, but I agreed. Overtime pay was hard to pass up, and besides, I figured it would be a quick drop-off. The address he gave me was on the outskirts of town, in an area I wasn't too familiar with. It was a long, winding drive down a narrow, poorly lit road that seemed to go on forever. The houses were few and far between, spaced out by long stretches of dense woods that loomed on either side of the road. As I drove, the fog grew thicker, and the trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The headlights barely cut through the gloom, and I had to strain my eyes to keep the road in view. Finally, I spotted the house, a small, run-down cottage at the end of a gravel driveway. The place looked like it had been abandoned years ago, with peeling paint, overgrown weeds, and a broken-down fence barely holding itself together. There were no lights on inside, and the whole place gave off a vibe that sent a shiver down my spine. But the address matched, so I pulled into the driveway and parked. The gravel crunched under my feet as I walked up to the front door, the pizza box in hand. I knocked a couple of times, but there was no answer. I waited, listening to the silence that pressed in from all sides. I knocked again, harder this time, and after a few moments, I heard slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door. The sound was faint, almost like it was coming from far away, but it grew louder as it drew closer. I couldn't see anything through the frosted glass of the door, just vague, shadowy shapes that shifted in the dim light. Finally, the door creaked open, just a crack, and I caught a glimpse of the person on the other side. A man, tall and gaunt, with pale skin that almost seemed to glow in the darkness. His eyes were sunken, and his clothes hung off him like they were 2 sizes too big. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I've got your pizza," I said, holding up the box. My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. The man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. He opened the door wider, but instead of stepping aside to let me hand him the pizza, he just stood there, blocking the entrance. "Thanks," he said, his voice low and raspy, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "You can just leave it on the table." He pointed to a small table just inside the door, and I hesitated, not wanting to go any further into the house. There was something off about the whole situation, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But I didn't want to be rude, so I stepped inside, just far enough to set the pizza on the table. The interior of the house was as run down as the outside, with peeling wallpaper, dusty furniture, and a faint musty smell that reminded me of an old basement. "Here you go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I handed him the receipt for him to sign, but instead of taking it, he just stared at me with those hollow eyes. "Do you ever wonder," he said slowly, his voice almost a whisper, "what happens to people who go missing?" The question caught me off guard. "Not really, no," I replied, backing away toward the door. "I guess they just disappear." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering my answer. "Yes, they disappear, and sometimes they never come back." My heart started to pound in my chest, and I felt a surge of panic rising up. "Look, I've got to get going," I said quickly, turning to leave. "Enjoy your pizza." But just as I reached the door, he spoke again. "Wait." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to see what expression he was wearing now. "You forgot something," he said. Against my better judgment, I turned around. He was still standing in the doorway, but now he was holding something in his hand. My phone. I hadn't even realized I'd left it on the table next to the pizza box, but there it was, in his pale, bony fingers. "Oh, thanks." I said, trying to hide the tremor in my voice as I took the phone from him. His hand brushed against mine, and I felt a cold, clammy sensation that made my skin crawl. "Be careful out there," he said softly, his eyes locking onto mine. "It's easy to get lost in the dark." I didn't say anything, just nodded and quickly left the house, closing the door behind me. As soon as I was outside, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The air felt thick and oppressive, and the fog seemed even denser than before. I practically ran to my car, my heart pounding in my chest, and jumped in, locking the doors behind me. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm down, but the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. I glanced back at the house, half expecting to see the man standing in the doorway, watching me. But the porch was empty, and the house was dark. I started the car and backed out of the driveway, eager to put as much distance between me and that house as possible. The fog swallowed up the road as I drove, and for a while I felt like I was the only person left in the world. The radio played softly in the background, but it did little to ease the tension. As I reached the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, just out of habit. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, standing on the side of the road, was the man. The same man who had just been in the house. He was watching me, his hollow eyes following the car as I sped away. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I pressed down on the gas, wanting to get as far away from him as I could. But the road ahead seemed endless, the fog thicker than ever. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see him again, but he was gone. By the time I reached the pizzeria, I was a nervous wreck. I parked the car and took a few deep breaths, trying to steady myself. It was just a creepy customer, I told myself. Nothing more. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I went inside to close out my shift, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My manager noticed and asked if I was okay, but I just brushed it off, not wanting to seem paranoid. As I was about to leave, I remembered the strange man's words. "Do you ever wonder what happens to people who go missing?" Something about the way he had said it, so calm and matter-of-fact, sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to look up the address in the delivery log, just to see if there was anything unusual about it. But when I found the order, my blood ran cold. The address didn't exist. There was no record of that house, no customer by that name, nothing. It was as if the entire delivery had never happened. I double-checked the receipt, but it was blank, just like the order slip. I even called the number listed on the order, but it was disconnected. Panic set in as I realized that I had no way to prove that I had ever been there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, maybe someone had set me up, but deep down I knew that wasn't the case. Something about that house, that man, wasn't right. I drove home that night in a daze, constantly checking my mirrors, half expecting to see him standing on the side of the road again. But he was gone, as if he had never existed. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about what he had said, about people who go missing, about how easy it is to get lost in the dark. And as the night dragged on, I realized that I would never be able to forget that man, or that house, or the cold, clammy touch of his hand. The next day, I called in sick, unable to face the idea of going back to work. My manager was understanding, but I could hear the doubt in his voice when I told him what had happened. He didn't say it, but I knew he thought I was imagining things, that maybe I was just stressed out or overtired, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there somewhere, watching me, waiting for the right moment to appear again. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, hit that like button and let us know which one freaked you out the most in the comments. Make sure to subscribe for more horror stories that'll keep you up at night. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying tale. Share this video with your friends if they dare to watch. Stay safe out there, and remember, not everything is as it seems. See you in the next one.